Yes. So let's begin. So today we have with us Sanjit Badhan, or Sanj as we all lovingly call him,
You?
our esteemed and long-standing client and a very dear friend. So he has 20 years of experience into CRM industry and clothes industry. He loves and hates Salesforce. And yes, welcome Sanj, and thank you for taking out your precious time to share your insights and journey into offshoring.
It's a pleasure, Rishma. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. And yes, so Sanj, you have used our managed services for quite a long time. And so
Mhm,
please tell us, how did your offshoring journey start? And
mhm.
basically, when and why did you start exploring the offshoring options?
No worries. First of all, can you hear me, Rishma? So my window's open.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Perfect. No worries. No worries. Just make sure there's no distractions yet. So my journey with Oopla started about 4 years ago. It might have been 5 years actually.
Okay.
I was working for an organization that had Salesforce,
Mhm.
but like many organizations, there's a big difference in buying Salesforce, onboarding Salesforce, and using it. And most organizations fail with the using part of it and understanding what to do with it. Salesforce, like many platforms, um, is not designed for marketeers. It's
Mm,
designed for technical people.
mm,
And often what happens, it's the marketeers and the creatives that are left holding this platform. So I inherited a team and I inherited a platform. Um, and we were struggling with the platform. The team was struggling with the platform. We were trying to force the platform to work in a way that the platform was not designed to work in that way.
mm, mhm,
Whilst we talk about things like being uh, targeted, we talk about having dynamic content and having dynamic journeys. These just become words; they mean nothing.
mhm,
So we were faltering and failing on a number of fronts. We were failing to get things out. We were failing to control the platform. We were reliant on third parties who were more involved in the uh, implementation of Salesforce than the usage. Okay,
mhm,
that led me to, in quite some desperation, to look into the market to find solutions.
mhm,
There was a number of UK solutions and providers who, if I'm honest with you, were not right because, again, they weren't getting to the blunt end of delivery and usage. What they were actually doing is trying to package up the implementation and the redesign of the platform. And it was a very costly solution for what we needed. What I needed and what the team needed was to feel like winners. We wanted to feel like champions. And when I came across Ooplas, um, what appealed to me was you were experts in email marketing.
mhm.
You stripped away all the garbage, all the technical garbage, and you were what you were. And that honesty really mattered to me. So we had a conversation. One conversation led to two, it led to three conversations. I think I met you, Reshma, on the third call. You were very quiet then, but I knew you were special then.
You
Um,
made me loud.
whatever. So we had a number of conversations, and then what we then did was we worked collaboratively to take control of the platform. And Ooplas wasn't just a delivery partner,
Mhm,
Ooplas was a training partner as well, helping us take control of the platform.
mhm,
And I was very careful with that relationship because I knew very early on that it was a special relationship. And it had to be a win-win relationship. I learned that through my career. It had to be a win-win relationship. And actually, Ooplas exceeded our expectations in the sense that not only were you integral to those operations, the team loved you, and we formed very strong bonds from that point onwards. Reputation is everything. Your reputation
mhm.
precedes you.
That's such a pleasure to know and such a music to ears when we recall those days. I think back 4 3 4 years back. That's when
Maybe
we.
a bit longer. Maybe a bit
Yeah,
longer.
yeah, true.
Yeah.
I remember I was too new to upload at that time,
Mhm,
and one reason I was too silent at that time, possibly. But yeah,
mhm.
I think around 4 to 5 years back. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm sure that as you carry such an extensive experience into offshoring, you can certainly guide others in this industry who are relatively new to the offshoring world, or
Mhm.
companies across the globe as well today are gradually realizing the benefits attached to it, like flexibility, cost effectiveness, or the plethora of options, etc. So, what do you think has been the biggest advantage of this model for you specifically?
I think it's interesting you talk about it in terms of offshoring terms, because I think Post-COVID, the world
Mhm.
changed.
Yeah.
And I was already working with teams across Europe, across the globe. Um, so offshoring doesn't have the same weight that it used to, the way it
Mhm.
used to. And I think commonality of language helps,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, is great for that. So I think from an offshoring perspective, I think it's not as big a decision as it used to be. I think the key thing is, I think, finding what we mean by offshoring. Often when we talk about offshoring, we start to think about cost and quality,
Yeah.
and those are
Yeah.
things that come front to mind. So actually, it's not an offshoring conversation. It's a conversation about quality. It's about conversation about personal brand. Am I prepared to work with this team? Are they going to represent me? Um,
Mhm.
and often, I think I know, and it can sound quite harsh, but often it's whose neck is on the line.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a really harsh way of thinking about it. But I didn't do that. But I know it's
Mhm.
often a part of the decision making on that when you hire a third party or you outsource, a small proportion is going towards the actual work. A big chunk of the cost and a big chunk of the relationship is in mitigation planning, in
Yeah.
guaranteeing success. And that's where I think things start to unravel, because it's not a conversation about skill sets and about delivery. It's a conversation about quality assurance
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
governance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so well, I would say, crafted. This really brings us to a point where even the time zone differences and the cultural nuances, as you rightly mentioned. Uh, so, when working with Indian teams, can you help us with some strategies that have worked for you to bridge any communication gap or maintain that seamless project management being under offshoring?
There's a couple of things that we did and that matter, and I still believe matter. So I think that one of the big barriers or the issues working with anyone who is offshore, and I won't say offshore teams, it can be within your own team as well, is technology can be a big barrier, and I know that uh, sometimes when you get resource abroad, not switching on your camera, there's cultural things that are really important. Language, grasp of the English language is very important. But even beyond that, because I actually worked for an international team, so it wasn't even the grasp of the English language, it was the grasp of English for both parties is a secondary language. Your English is impeccable, but if you're dealing with, and
Yep.
forgive me,
Yep.
Germans or Italians or French counterparts,
Mhm.
English is a second language for them. And often you're having to translate and work with them and understand the nuances of the language. It's easier for me to understand the nuance, but
Yes.
for some of those markets, it can be difficult. Even between English and American English, there are nuances and cultural differences. Time is not an issue, Reshma, because actually uh, some markets can be difficult, but India is a 5 hour time difference. It has never been an issue. It's been an advantage actually, because you are waking up earlier than us. Things happen a lot faster. But I think there needs to be some SLA and some respect around those boundaries. Either the team is working to UK times,
Mhm.
or there are some clear SLAs around that. Um, I actually think it's the biggest advantage because it forces everyone to become a bit more grown up and a bit more organized in the way they work.
Mhm.
Um, I think one of the criticisms you might hear from others that have used the service is actually they want untapped service that doesn't exist in any part of the world. It never has, it never will. And I think there's a conflation of feeling that this resource is abroad, it's in India, it's a less expensive resource, therefore I can demand what I demand, and that's not the same, and that's not the case. The costs are low not because of quality, but because it's a different market, it's a different bench, it's a different baseline.
Yep. Yep. So truly said. And gradually, if you look at the bigger part of people who are looking for offshoring to India, I think one of the major advantage they foresee is that cost effectiveness. But many times it is kind of clubbed with the
Mm,
kind of lack of qualitative resources or that over demanding
yeah,
ownership
yeah,
that comes along with it. So
yeah.
very true. So specifically when it comes to India, what do you think are the pros and the cons of offshoring in India?
Yeah. Just before we move on, Reshma, there was one point that I forgot with the previous question, which I think is really
Mhm.
important.
Mhm.
Um, And you'll know who I'm talking about. When it comes to offshoring, you do need a champion. And I had a champion in my team that could be the middle person, could grow that relationship. And that was a strategic move. Because actually, what often happens is when you offshore is there's very little organization on the client side to think about how that relationship is going to work. And in order for both of you to succeed, someone has got to be in the middle to manage it. It can be a resource manager, it can be a Salesforce admin, it can be a project manager, but someone has to be there to be the funnel to help prioritize and protect. And that's really critical, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
what was the question you just asked? Apologies. Let's if you
yeah,
just repeat
yeah.
it.
Sure. So, like we spoke about the cultural nuances,
Yeah.
or different perspectives of different companies who are looking forward to offshoring in India. The first thing that comes to mind is the cost effectiveness, the
Yeah.
flexibility. When it comes to cost effectiveness, like you rightly mentioned, it's looked more towards lack of qualitative resources, or possibly the cost effectiveness is also compared with the quality of the talents, and henceforth the own presumed demand for more working hours, is
Mhm.
that something that comes into picture? Do you think that's the right perspective? And along with it, when it comes to offshoring in India, what do you think are the pros as well as the cons for someone who is possibly offshoring for the first time
Okay.
to India?
It's a very loaded question, and my when I answer it, I feel like I'm forced into a position to give you a book written answer when I know the truth is something else. And I think, and I'd rather go with the truth because of our relationship, because I think it benefits everyone, is often um, the conversation around value for money and effectiveness doesn't exist.
Mhm.
Okay. You've got to understand the market we operate within, and let's take Salesforce specifically, and it could be any CRM platform, is an inflated market. There's
Yeah,
a lot of cost, there's a lot of resource baked in unnecessarily. Actually, what's needed to get these things working probably doesn't require as much resource, but it is. You pay a lot of money to implement third parties, a lot. Okay. So often decision making around offshoring is not about effectiveness, because I've very rarely come across a conversation where someone sat down and said, let's look at the business case, let's look at the return on investment from a campaign perspective, let's look at how this is going to increase our metrics. Now, often what it's about is it's a fixed cost. It has to be put against some kind of IT budget somewhere.
yeah,
And it has to be managed, and someone has to put their neck on the line. And often it's a shifting of the responsibility on someone else's shoulders. And so often the benefit is a reputation people benefit. And I think sometimes we have to lead into that. And the reason it's important for you is because I think often with offshoring, there's a feeling that we can talk about cost effectiveness, and I actually think sometimes it's the wrong conversation. You're better off just saying offshoring means you are going to get less cost because our baseline is different. We're not talking about that now. We're now going to talk about actually what your needs are at an individual level, at an organization level, what you're looking to achieve. And achieving doesn't have to be metrics, it should be, but it isn't always. It can sometimes be, I want to look good, or I want to build trust with my board. I want the chief technology officer to have confidence. I want the chief marketing officer to feel like they're empowered and they're in control of this. It's those kind of conversations which I think are really, really critical. Um, Cost is a dirty word, and I think it cheapens the conversation and it takes you away from where you need to be. Does that help?
yep, absolutely. And then it really helps when there are conversations related to say value for money, because it's very subjective. There's no standard to compare. Also, like you rightly mentioned, it's the different baselines that we are talking about, and it also the different plethora of options that we're talking about when it comes to the quantum, which is available in terms for choosing the right talents from the Indian demographic.
Yeah.
Yeah. But along with India, Sanju, aware, there are many other countries or other regions where the offshoring is equally prevalent.
Yeah.
What do you think? Which countries are well suited for offshoring, and which countries preferred when? Uh, if we can do that.
Say the latter part again, Rashma. Which countries prefer what?
So which countries are kind of well suited for offshoring, and
Mhm.
when to choose which country? So are there any specific positions which are better availed at certain regions or countries, or how do we choose which
Yeah,
country to offer?
it's interesting because I can't talk about all the markets in the world, but the country that often competes with India is South Africa.
Yeah. Okay.
It's South Africa, okay? And the perception is South Africa is I hate this word, cheaper and not as good quality as India resource. And that might be nothing to do with the individuals, but it may be to do with market maturity, if I'm honest with you, okay? And India is a bigger market, which you talk about India as a market, but actually India is probably several markets combined in one, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah.
So I don't think there are many markets out there uh, on par with India at the moment. One, because of the language, two, because of the size. Yes, countries like South Africa come up. Even from the Far East, some regions coming up. Even Middle East is coming up.
Mhm.
But I don't think they're competing on the same landscape. And I think language is the biggest
Advantage.
benefit, advantage you have. Yeah, yes. I would say so. The other thing you've got to understand is I'm of Indian origin, so I have a lot more confidence, and we have to call that out. We have to call that out. A lot more confidence in understanding cultural nuances and advocating the use of Indian resource.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So true, and it becomes really easier when you're working across the borders,
yeah,
across different miles. It really helps in understanding the contextual understanding from where the candidate is
yeah.
coming.
A more sensible question is: if you look at NASA, how many of the people in NASA come from India versus other markets? And that'll be very insightful for everyone. And if anyone's listening to this interview, search for it,
Yeah.
and then you'll know the answer.
Yep, absolutely. Right. Also, so as you may have also experienced, there are certain expectations. So how do you manage the client expectations when discussing the potential benefits or challenges associated with offshoring? So, for example, what apprehensions do you have to deal with, or how do you deal with them?
Compliance is the big one. So one of the big concerns is obviously when you're dealing with CRM and data is compliance. It's about data security. And I think we have to be very clear about roles and responsibilities when it comes to anything to the data management and platform management. Okay, and this is where having an intermediary and a partner is really useful. I think you have to be very clear about how the partner is going to fit in, who they're going to report into, and what the risks and liabilities are. I think it's very clear to kind of lead into that. And the question is always going to be there: why offshore versus have someone in market? And I think you have to answer that directly. Yeah, that's what I would say. So I don't think it's about major concerns as such. I think it's just about making sure your compliance is in place. I think it's going to be really important. Also, you have to decide whether the offshoring partner is going to be interfacing at a number of levels.
Right.
Like I would be happy for you, Reshma, to talk to anyone, from the CEO to anyone, but not everyone within the UPLIS team or the offshoring team is designed for that. So you have to design a team with your stakeholders in mind. Who are you interfacing with? Who are you going to be talking to?
Right. Right. Connecting the right people with the
Yeah,
right people of contact.
yeah.
Okay. So as your major focus has also been into SFMC, let's start with Indian SFMC demographic. So how do you think the Indian market is positioned when it comes to skilled SFMC talents compared to other regions? And what are basically the strengths and potential areas of development which you observe here?
So I also learned about India SFMC when I onboarded Oculus. That's the truth. I didn't know before then. So I can only base it on what I saw. And actually, uh, the talent was exceptional. The one problem you have, and this is where I talk about my love-hate relationship with Salesforce, is uh, you get a lot of people with Salesforce certification or skill set that make it up
Right.
because there is no manual to Salesforce Marketing Cloud. There is a number of ways to do the same thing. Okay.
Mm.
And this is why there's an entire industry in certification, because
Yeah.
It's really hard to know it. It's not a platform that you can just open up and work with it. The labeling, the design makes little sense because Salesforce, from a strategy point of view, is a culmination of tools that they've joined together. It's
Yeah.
not a single tool if you think about it. Okay. So the thing that matters is someone who they don't have to know everything, but they need to be able to navigate and come up with solutions and give options. And that's where I think Oopla's won because I wasn't looking for noise. I wasn't looking for sound bites. I wasn't looking for someone to sound clever. I was looking for, let's think about how we can do this. What's the best option? What's your solution versus my solution? And do that. And I think that's where Indian resources tend to win. I think where they struggle, I think, and I'll be very honest with you, I think there's an inferiority complex sometimes. I think there's an inferiority complex, and that's world over when you're dealing with especially British counterparts. I think there can be, they shouldn't be. They really shouldn't be. And I think that's perpetuated by language and culture and so forth. But I think that lack of confidence can play a part. I mean, I tried with Upa's team to build up that confidence and we succeeded. But that's where I think it's lacking sometimes, is that lack of confidence, that lack of putting an idea on the table and feeling that there's a right or wrong answer. With Salesforce, there's never a right or wrong answer. There's just options.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also remember how much time and efforts you invested at that time in actually grooming the team which was working with you to build up that confidence. Now I can connect the dots and recall how we were placing that
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
strategically. Yeah,
yeah.
that's great. Right. Can you also share an example of a successful marketing or a customer experience program that you have offshored to India?
Well, Oopla is the big success campaign. I mean, to give your viewers, anyone who sees this video, an understanding of what we did, we took mass-produced campaigns, and you're talking over 200 to 300 email campaigns a quarter across 8 different languages. I think it was across God knows how many markets. It was mammoth, where nothing was segmented, to a place where we had pre-designed journeys, dynamic panels. You pressed the button on a brief and over 400 segments were populated. That has never been achieved in any organization I've ever seen. And I think it's really important people understand what I'm talking about. Sometimes it gets lost under the weight of the SFMC conversation and CRM. No, everyone. We did mammoth stuff. It was amazing. And I think that was a success. And if anyone wants to know what that looks like, ask Ooplers for the playbooks they created. Ask them for the visual identities they created. You know, do that. You know, understand how the template color changed based on region. Understand how different languages came into existence. You know, just go through it. I've never seen it done before, ever.
That's great. And what factors do you think contributed to that success of that project, or any lessons learned in that journey?
Couple of things. We were not working against Salesforce and our outsourcing partner. We were working with them. Salesforce is Salesforce. It works in a particular way. And our outsourcing partner was set up to succeed. So we knew where we needed to get to, and we were looking at the solution together. And we were very clear about service level agreements and protecting the roadmap and our partner to get to where we needed to get to. And I think that was really critical for making it a success.
Great. Great. Okay. And yes. So yes, coming to the future, what are your predictions for the future of Indian SFMC talent pool, and how can the companies or platforms like Uplus can stay ahead of the curve?
I think one of the issues today is the market for Salesforce talent is so huge globally that I don't think India per se and Nucleus have necessarily taken the bull by the horns. And I think there's an opportunity to reposition the market as at a grander level as Salesforce Marketing Cloud leaders. So when it comes to the platform, we understand the platform better than anyone.
Mhm.
And I think that requires a bit more brand building and a bit more liaising at a Salesforce level. And I know it's very difficult because actually Salesforce themselves create lots of competition. They themselves are trying to play in these markets and so forth. But I think that's where we need to get to, is a place where actually you're not seen as another talent pool. It's not just a cost conversation. It's actually, how does this market support best in class thinking? If you took the work that I did with you, that is best in class. That doesn't exist. No one talks about it in market. And I've not seen Ooplas necessarily bring it to the top to showcase it and say, this is what it is. We get lost in language, Reshma, when we talk about even the word SFMC, where actually it's basic things like, Reshma, how do I change the color of my header based on gender of someone? It's a very silly thing, but I'm being very specific with you.
Yeah.
We need to elevate those conversations which matter. Too many people are scared to say they don't know. And so what happens is everyone's talking the game, but no one's getting to the ground. And the one thing I learned through the process of not just working with you, but through my career in the last couple of years, is Salesforce works best when you act stupid. Just ask the questions. It's fine.
Yeah, like life. Yeah, so true. And last but not the least, and what is, I'm sure you covered a lot in our conversation
Just
along.
before we move on, can I just say Ooplas also took my team and me, and we all became certified.
Oh yeah,
Salesforce.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great that we were able to do that together.
No, but partners don't do that. Partners are very protective.
But I think the way you have collaborated with us in the whole partnership, you both have been really key people for us as well and help us grow. So
Okay.
this very well positioned partnership that we have grown with each other for sure. Yeah. Yes, coming back, I'm sure you have covered a lot of aspects in the journey of working with Upwork, but in your experience overall, in a gist, what do you think is unique with Upwork?
The people. The people. It was the first time I'd worked with Indian agencies in the past. I'd done that, but it'd been part of bigger setups. But I think the culture was different. It was a very startup, very dynamic culture, which was very good. And it's interesting we're having this conversation because when I started the conversation with Ooplas, outsourcing was not the key element. And I remember talking to your CEO, having a one-to-one call with him, where I brought up this idea that the market is changing. There are legislation changes within the UK, which means that the concept of people being self-employed is changing. And there's a lot more governance around that. And actually, there's an opportunity to start to step in. I remember having that conversation. And you've responded to that. And that's what I mean. That's been the secret ingredient, really. Yeah.
Absolutely. And here we are. We now have 100 plus or 1 million plus talent pool just with that start of the idea for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we are at the end of it. Thank you. Thanks a lot for sharing that time and inputs. I'm sure this conversation is going to help many people who are currently exploring how to offshore, what to offshore, possibly searching for do's and don'ts of offshoring or certain tricks and tips of navigating into this uncharted land. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
No worries, Rishma. Thank you very much.